We do love trees. We can't get enough of trees. We use them as symbols. We plant them everywhere. We treasure them. But basically, everybody loves a tree. So what is the basis of our dendrophilia, if I might coin a phrase?
Yeah, well, I was walking home from kindergarten one day, and it was at the end of the school year, and silver maple seeds were ripe and they were falling. And I saw these little whirlybirds coming down. I had no idea what they were, so I scooped up some and brought them home. And my mother said, "Well, I think those are maple seeds. We'll plant them in your sandbox," which I did. And being silver maple, lo and behold, 3 days later, up they came. So there's a little maple tree starting in my sandbox. And oh boy, that's my trees. And from then on, I was hooked.
I've loved trees since I was a little kid, and one of the great moments of my life was when my parents moved from a newly platted suburb south of San Francisco into this older town south of San Francisco. And we were on a corner, and there were these enormous, beautiful trees, and it was a small yard, but it had these gorgeous trees in it, including a Monterey cypress, a couple of deodar cedars, and I thought I'd gone to heaven. So my brother and I basically grew up in those trees.
That started as a little kid going camping with my family in national forests. And I don't know, I was about 10 or 11. The area we went, there were quite a few aspen forests. And I think back to that, aspen trees are one of my real favorites. They're so beautiful and white, and with some of the black on there as they mature, and then the leaves that just flutter in the slightest breeze. And it filled my soul. That was the place for me, was being out in the forest.
As a child, I was immediately drawn to forests. I just wanted to be in the woods and see the creatures that were there. I wanted to climb trees and see if it looked different from on top of a tree than at the bottom, and it does. So it was just something really pretty visceral.
I love trees. I grew up climbing in trees, and trees were landmarks and important parts of my life. I lived on a street lined with American elms when I was a young boy that you couldn't even see the sky in the summer because the canopy arched over the street. And there was a tree we called Big Tree, which was a tree that we always reuned and rendezvoused at. And it was a really large, I don't even know what kind of tree it was, but it was, we used to go out and play in the woods and, sand hills and woods, and that was where we always came back together.
I wasn't a person who grew up on a farm or, with a family that spent a bunch of time in the woods. It was usually from right around my neighborhood. The things that really interested me was just exploring in the forest wherever I was, turning over the leaves and seeing what was under there, looking at the insects, looking at, how moss grew on a tree. For some reason, compared to my other brothers and sisters, it just gave me a real sense of wonder and where I wanted to be.
I was born and raised here in LA, and when I grew up, it was really, really smoggy. It hurt to breathe on most days. And my parents did with me what many parents did. I was fortunate. They sent me out of the city up to the forest, 100 miles from here. And I went to summer camp. And I fell in love with the trees, with the forest, because we could play. We could run, we could jump. It didn't hurt. And I think I fell in love with all kinds of things of the forest that I didn't understand, just the not cityness of it. The house I grew up in had an apple tree that my parents had planted, and I loved that tree, and I used to certainly love eating the applesauce my mom would make and playing around it.
Grew up in the woods in Elmore County, Alabama, and right on the Coosa River, and just loved the woods, loved being in the woods. Being out in the woods was the absolute peace. It was the most at home I ever was. Even today, it is. It was the safest I ever felt. It was the most inviting atmosphere for me. And it was just a whole new world to explore. And at every turn, something different. There was nothing the same. Every 10 feet, everything changed.
As a boy, as far back as I can remember, and as far back as I can remember, I had an interest in nature. And that grew very serious when I was just 9 years old. But I feel that I grew up with trees, among them. And as a person with special interest in biological diversity, in my case, the more, the better.
I was very lucky when I was a child because although we didn't have any money, my grandmother lived in a house with a big garden. You would call it a backyard. And there were many trees there. I climbed every single one of them. And my special tree was a beech tree. And I used to climb up that tree. And I seemed, you know, I could feel the life in beech. I felt very close to beech. Beech was like a person. And I would tell my secrets to the tree. And sometimes if I would put my ear to the trunk, I would seem to hear the sound of the sap rising. And it was a very, very lovely relationship.
Well, I can't remember when I didn't love trees. I mean, it goes back way, way back. It goes back to where I grew up in Bethesda, Maryland. My parents had this wonderful house that was 2.5 acres in suburban Maryland, which is quite unusual to have that much land. But the driveway, the long driveway to the house was lined with these 8 maple trees. And I used to come home from school, drop my books in the house, say hi to my mom who was always home, grab a snack, get an apple or whatever, grab a book. I'd like to read up in trees, and then go up into the canopy. And I never grew out of climbing trees. I mean, I'm still climbing trees today, but I'm doing it in a scientific way.
When I was a kid, I used to fantasize that as a grown-up, I would invent a special kind of microphone that I could stick into the tree somehow, and then I could understand the language that would come out, and I thought, well, it would come out really slow, like, wow, hi, Nalini. But it turns out I haven't invented that yet, and I probably never will.